Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope you're all doing well today. Today I've got some terrifying encounters to share with you, ranging from Skinwalker to Unidentified Cryptid. Before we get into these encounters, a couple links I'd like to share. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help this channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. I also have a second channel for creepypasta, fanfiction, and scary voice acting. Stories that really don't fit on this channel. Now, if that's anything that you're into, follow that link and give those stories a listen. You may just like what you hear. I also started a GoFundMe page a while back to help raise some money for urbex, cryptid hunting, and ghost hunting equipment. So far, I have an EVP recorder, an SLS cam, and some trail cams. If that's anything that you're interested in helping with, that link is also in the description below. Now I've definitely taken enough of your time. Let's get on with these cryptid encounters. Shall we? Today's first encounter. The area we lived in initially was slightly out of town, a neighborhood near a park that was a sacred site to the tribe and the Anasazi before them. Because of its location, it was a bit isolated and the homes were all company owned. Most of them had stood empty for who knows how long, but the company that my significant other worked for at the time had just started opening them for their employees. There were maybe 15 homes in this little pocket neighborhood with lots of space between them, and only 3 of them had anyone living in them, including ours. On our street, there was a single empty house across the street, some basketball courts next door, and up the street. An empty house next door, and an occupied home at the top of the road with its back to the park. Streets out on the Navajo Res are pretty dark, even in the neighborhoods. For this one long road, there were just 2 streetlights, one at the bottom of the road and one at the top. Being in the middle, it was quite dark and pretty awesome for stargazing. Our house was nestled at the bottom of a steep slope, so the road in front was about a 6-foot ridge. I'd been there for about less than a year when it all started. I was a smoker, so in the evening I'd go outside and sit on my bench, smoke a cigarette, and bounce between stargazing and checking around my feet for scorpions. The first thing I ever noticed was hearing a kind of mad and chaotic flute song. It sounded like somebody had handed a recorder to a toddler, and that's how I rationalized it. Some poor parents in this practically empty neighborhood had given their kid a recorder and were being tortured with it. I kind of laughed and imagined their misery and didn't think much of it. The next night, around 9:30 again, the same thing happened. Heard the flute, laughed at the poor parents, and didn't think much of it, and the same with the night after. On the 4th night, though, I was up later than usual, much later, and went outside to have a cigarette. I heard this whoop sound coming from the basketball courts where next door, but couldn't figure out if they came from the small pocket of trees between me and the court or the court itself. It sounded distinctly human, so I decided to call it a night and go to bed. The following night, I went outside for a cigarette and was sitting there when I saw something small and distinct move through the trees, but on the road. I sat there smoking and watching it, trying to figure out what it was. I wasn't too worried because my significant other was awake and in the front room with the front door wide open, so if anything was going to whoop at me, he'd be there in a second. Whatever it was didn't look human. It was far too small and low to the ground, so I just watched it, curious to see what it was. Its fur was very light in color, and when it cleared the trees and started casually continuing up the road in front of my house, I figured that it had to be a cat because of its size and color of its fur. There was no way it could have been anything else, and on top of that, the fur was too clean. To me, it looked like somebody's house cat had gotten out of their home. I was still pretty new to the res and didn't realize that most Navajo don't have house cats in their homes. I got worried about it as I watched it walking up the road because the family at the top of the road had some big dogs. So I got up, put my cigarette out and decided that an intervention was in order. I made my way up my driveway and slowly tried to catch up with the cat because I didn't want to scare it off and send it running straight to doggy doom. There didn't seem to be much of a rush, though, as the cat had taken to meandering on the road ahead of me, so I started calling to it softly, trying to coax it over to me so I could rescue the poor thing. When I got within 10 feet of it, though, however, I realized that there was some serious problems with this cat. First, it had no tail and its body was lumpy and odd. It looked like it was floating above the ground instead of walking on it, and its legs swung back and forth rhythmically instead of stepping. The head didn't even appear to have ears. I felt absolute terror, as I had no idea what I was even looking at, because this thing was not right. I ran back down the road, down to my driveway, and had my hand on my screen door to go inside when I stopped myself and turned to look back at it one more time. The not cat had stopped where we had been, just sitting there, with the ridge and the chain link fence between us, and the screen door right there, and ran inside. I figured I was safe to keep watching it and try to figure out what it was. I let the screen door go and turned to watch. After a few seconds, the not cat started walking its way up the road again towards the house at the top. Just before it got to where the light from the streetlight had shone down, it stopped in the dim light and started to roll around furiously in the clay alongside of the road. All I could see was the fur and dust, but then it stopped and rose up, this time appearing much larger than the not cat with its fur all dusty from the dirt. It moved into the light, and that's when I saw that it was an elderly woman, naked under the hair that covered the top of her head and ran down her back. She slowly walked on all fours until she was positioned directly under the streetlight and then crouched down to stare at me. I don't know how long we stared at each other, but at that point my significant other spotted me, totally frozen, and came out to investigate. I didn't say a word, and he looked over where I was staring, uttered some scared obscenities, grabbed me and dragged me into the house, bolting the door behind us. He was Navajo, so he was pretty upset that I was gawking at a Skinwalker instead of running inside and locking the door behind me like a sensible person. He was even more livid when he found out that I had actually thought it was a cat and tried to capture it. Nice move on my part. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night and had to deal with my friends and even my own mother, who knew I had never done drugs or drank, implying that I was somehow either high or drunk to experience this. Thanks, guys. The rules totally changed after that night. I wasn't allowed to go outside at night anymore without my significant other, and never after he went to bed. Our next visit, shortly after this one, we were eating dinner in the kitchen when my cat very uncharacteristically jumped on me, climbed to the top of my shoulder, and started hissing and growling at something behind me. The only thing behind me was the laundry room with its small window, and my significant other and eldest saw the pasty, globby white face of a Skinwalker peering through it, watching us eat dinner. All we could really do was just shut the door to the laundry room and not go outside that night at all. Out on the reservation we were at, the garbage cans were kept in these elevated cages to keep animals, especially wild dogs, from knocking them over. The next morning we came out to find our garbage cans completely lifted out of this cage, and our garbage was strewn all over the road. When we put them back, we spotted dusty mountain lion tracks on the top of the lids. To me, this was really interesting because it wasn't like a random collection of paws like you might imagine if an animal was working hard on knocking these garbage cans over. They were neatly lined up like a mountain lion was a bunny strolling across the top of it. They were definitely not legitimate animal tracks, but more like somebody stamped the top with a mountain lion paw. It was at this point that my significant other decided that we needed to contact the medicine man. What we didn't know at that time was that during all this, my eldest had woken in the middle of one night and thought he had heard me. So he turned his light to come see me. It took him at least 15 years to tell us about this, but apparently, when he came out of his room, he realized our door was shut and the lights were all off in the house. He looked down the hall and saw 2 red, dimly glowing eyes. He did what any other 6-year-old would do in this situation and went back into his room, shut the door, and hid under the covers. So anyway, my significant other called his uncle, whose father was a medicine man, and told him that we were getting visited by a skinwalker. The medicine man was a crystal gazer and a singer, and that was really interesting. We didn't tell him anything about what we had seen, but somehow he knew everything. He knew that I had seen this very unusually colored fur and told us that the skinwalker that I had seen was actually the head of the local skinwalkers. She was a very old and only one who had the right to wear the fur. Her purpose out there that night was to teach 2 young skinwalkers the art of skinwalking, and there was a 4th skinwalker there to guard the children, who was a mountain lion. Unfortunately for us, because I reacted the way I did, this elderly skinwalker decided that I must have some sort of power that she hadn't seen before, and so there was nothing that we could do, because she was now interested in me. She wanted to find out what my power was and if I posed a threat to her. And if I did, then she would kill me and take my power. In short, kill me and dig up my corpse for whatever she wanted. Lucky for me, I didn't have a power other than equal measures of abject stupidity and curiosity. Unlucky for us, because of this, she never figured out what my power was, and maybe she was resentful of that fact that I didn't get completely duped or rushed inside of the house. But after that, it didn't matter what house we lived in on the res. The flute would start up and the skinwalkers would show up soon after. Today's second encounter. First of all, I live in Murphy, North Carolina, in the center of town, and to the right of my house is a wooded area that's fenced off. I'm telling you guys this because it may be of some importance. I'm a 31-year-old female, and on the weekends I'm home alone because my 2 kids stay with my uncle and my husband works late hours. I was coming home from a friend's house, and she lives a couple houses up from me. It was about 8:30 when I returned home. There's streetlights that come up through about mid-part of the road and then end, so there's about a 40-foot walk in pitch darkness. I have to enter my house from the back door because my front door is locked to keep stupid people out. Well, I'm chilling on the mattress in the living room that we moved out there because it's cold in the house and it's easier to move around because I have nerve damage in the feet. So I was watching some anime and paused the episode to eat because it's hard for me to eat ramen noodles and watch TV without my glasses sliding down my nose. And I had just let my cat Ryu because he was meowing frantically at the door. And as I opened it, he ran inside and I shut the door. I was puzzled because I didn't know what was wrong. I sat back down and I finished my food and I heard this noise on my porch. It sounded like something in between a goat and a bear cub right in front of the door. At first, I thought I was crazy until I looked at my cats, Ryu, Dottie, and Lilith, and they were looking straight at my front door and growling and hissing at the noise. Every 30 to 40 seconds, it would make this horrible noise and end with clicking sounds and thumping on the outside of my house. At this point, I'm terrified and tears of fear started rolling down my cheeks. I hurriedly texted my husband at work and told him what I heard and how the cats were reacting, and after a couple of minutes, he told me to lock the front door. I was terrified of making any noise, and as I approached the door, I was on my knees because I didn't want to see this thing. And as I reached to lock the door, it made the sound again. I jumped in fear and hurriedly locked the door and scrambled back to the bed. The sounds of thumping on the walls made me burst into tears, and I pulled my blankets close to me as I shook. Then the sound stopped and all was silent. As my heart raced, I sat still, afraid to make the smallest sound. I had thought of calling 911, but they would never believe me. I felt trapped and stalked. As I stared around, checking my cat's reaction, I heard this loud sound that sounded almost like a howler monkey, and as fast as it started, it stopped. Then about 5 minutes later, I could hear it circling my house, making that sound like a goat and a bear, and it scratched and thumped on my house. By this time, my chest hurt from the stress and fear. I felt this sensation like impending doom and evil. It made these goat-like sounds and returned to my porch, and for a few seconds it got louder then vanished. One thing I know for sure is that from the Native American part of my family, they say that a lot of things are here in the Smoky Mountains, and to never look at them. I also need to say that I have been a witch ever since I was 13 years old, and I am linked also by a Nordic blood in my family, and know a few things about magic and creatures of the woods that are natural. I've grown up with them, but the sound I heard was nothing an animal would make around here. I don't know what it was, but I'm afraid it might come back and stalk me again. What I'm telling you, I know it sounds impossible, that this is my first encounter with this thing in my entire life, but I swear I'm telling you guys the honest truth. Terrifying. 2 terrifying encounters. Jesus, they were... The last one just creeped the shit right on me because you don't know what it is. Once again, everyone knows that the stories of skinwalkers and not knowing what something is the worst for me in my mind. Just real creepy. I'm trying to think of North Carolina cryptids that make the goat sound or some sound of, like a goat. Could have been a goat man. Could have been a Sasquatch. Could have been a bunch of things. Just real creepy, though. The first encounter was definitely creepy. Skinwalkers, as we all know, creep the shit right out of me. One thing that I found interesting was that this elder woman was training or teaching to younger people in the tribe the art of skinwalking. And skinwalking was not necessarily always a dark or black magic practice. It was used to benefit the tribe, to invade other warring tribes and see what they were up to and their plans, get their plans, kind of blend in, and also to sneak up on animals for food for their tribe. And it's very interesting. I'd like to know what you guys thought of these, and so please leave a comment below. And with that, guys, I bid you farewell.